fundamentally, your ability to create a competitive advantage is not to focus on price or differentiation, but to really focus on the resources and capabilities that you have at your disposal. Again, it's a combination of these two things that really make a big difference. So, some examples of resources. There are tangible resources, and this is sort of as like accounting when you think of like tangible assets and intangible assets, but it's not exactly like that. These are resources might not be, some of these resources wouldn't be considered on your balance sheet in any capacity. And tangible resources include things like cash, machinery, factories, land, things like that. Traditional stuff that made America through the industrial phase very strong. And then there's intangible things, patents, technology, people, proprietary know-how, stuff like that. Now, over time, the tangible resources become very unimportant in our economy. Actually, I'll get to that in a second, I guess. I forgot the order of my slides, apparently. But capabilities, again, are your ability to use whatever resources you do have. Like you could have, if you have plenty of cash on hand, I mean, there are a lot of, think about this right now. In the stock market, you have these very large businesses that have huge amounts of capital on hand, don't know how to deploy it effectively in their own businesses, and instead are buying back stock. So there is a fundamental lack of capabilities in those organizations to maintain any long-term competitive advantage, according to Michael Porter. Does that make sense? They have that tangible asset, but they don't have the capabilities to exploit it. So the question is, this gets to the intangible or tangible, which really matters more. This is a measure of essentially market cap based upon the balance sheets of companies, whether or not it's how much of it is determined by tangible versus intangible assets. And over time, you can see intangible assets now make up 81% of market value for companies, not tangible. So the factories, all that stuff, it doesn't matter anymore, at least the way the market is measuring it. And I only have data through 2010, but at least through that point, it didn't matter. You guys with me so far? So intangible matters more than tangible. And specifically, let's get into some of these. Ultimately, in any of the organizations that I've run, that I've built, I think that there's this continuous focus on what resources you have available and what exactly your capabilities, and constantly iterating, trying to keep and tweak and improve those as much as you can. And I think the only real advantage that any business can have is something that feels a lot like running on a treadmill. And it's basically constantly optimizing. And who here, as an entrepreneur, has felt like they're running on a treadmill at any point in their business, right? That's part of that. Now the question is, the key, I think, is that you want to make it so that you don't have to be the person always running on the treadmill, but your organization has the ability to run on the treadmill and changes over time. So, where should we focus our efforts as people who are interested in creating a long-term competitive advantage? I'll start with where we shouldn't focus. You guys know the story of a white elephant, not the Christmas gift-giving exercise, but the king of Siam, basically, he would give to people this albino elephant as a gift, but it was meant to basically cause them a crazy undue burden because they couldn't use it for any work because it was a sacred animal. But it was very expensive to feed and maintain. So it was something that seemed like a really great reward. You're getting it from the king. You had the obligation, though, of maintaining it, and you couldn't use it for any productive work at all. And I think that there are a lot of the things that are looked at as assets or resources or advantage actually are white elephants. They actually are exactly the opposite of that. Specifically, all of these things I would describe as white elephants, and a lot of these things are things that I have certainly felt like are very important at different points in the businesses that I've built. Cash is always important. Okay, one example of one. You guys all know what, you all know Berkshire Hathaway, you know Warren Buffett, you know Berkshire Hathaway was a textile manufacturer. That's where the business all came from. So it was a terrible business. Terrible business. After 20 years of losing money, Warren Buffett in 1985 finally shut it down. 20 years, Warren Buffett's a smart man. 20 years of losing money in this business, he shut it down. But part of the reason he kept it going, because there was just always, part of it he felt like there's some sort of obligation, to the people that were there, the workers, they were really trying to, the labor negotiations with them, they were actually always very reasonable with him. And he had good management there. But the thing is that there was always this promise of if they would just spend some more money, upgrade the technology that they were using, that then it would give them some competitive advantage and that they could actually start to earn some money. But as he says in his 1985 letter, each new capital investment proposal to do so looked like an immediate winner measured on the standard return on investment tests. But the promised benefits from these textile investments were illusory. They never happened. So decades of putting more money into it and you never get ahead because at the same time, the whole competitive environment, everybody's doing that. Everyone's making these and they're basically driving this commodity activity you're engaged in to zero, where there's no ability, again, as economists would say, to collect rent on it, to like really, where there's no real margin in any of it. So with this one, I would say not only is the tangible resources, in this case, the factory, the plant, all of that, a white elephant, I'd also argue this that commoditized know-how and capabilities. He wasn't doing anything special. Even when they hired the best equipment and hopefully doing it in a little better way, they're also competing on a globalized scale. So now they're competing with labor that's a quarter of what they were doing. So that was also a weakness for them. And then technology, ultimately, again, I think constant upgrades didn't help. So technology and patents, I'm going to argue as well. Now, that seems weird. We live in a world where all the money is in these big tech companies. How is this possible that could be a white elephant? I have a couple examples. First of all, I want to admit that there is a macro benefit to the market for people to spend enormous amounts of money on invention. This is basically a study that was done correlating patent filings with stock prices. And this one is done on consumer-focused companies. But actually, if you do it modeled on, it has to be smooth a little bit, but if you do it on the S&P 500, it's exactly the same. I mean, patent filings follow the S&P track record. It's weird. Okay, so it shows you that overall the macro benefit of that invention activity is huge for the economy. But within that, there's a lot of losers. So to me, I would actually argue that this is the ultimate treadmill, is trying to keep up with technology, because the one thing about this kind of IP, and I am going to talk a little bit about another kind of IP later, is that this IP is a never finished product. It is a product that is meant to be destroyed. So you come up with a new invention that does some new thing in a new way, it is only a milestone along the way to a better end. And your goal must be to destroy it, or otherwise it will be destroyed by others. So you're never creating anything that ultimately has any long-term sustaining value. This is the epitome of creative destruction. Schumpeter's Gale, it's called. I mean, there are massive amounts of people think they have great value and great inventions that are earning a lot of money, and they just disappear completely in under a decade. One of the classic examples of that is Kodak. Everyone knows Kodak, right? So Kodak in 1995 had the best business in the world, huge cash flows, and they had the patent on digital cameras. By 2005, all their cash cow had completely gone away. By 2012, they were filed for bankruptcy. In 2012, they estimated that their patents on their balance sheet were worth $2 to $3 billion. In the market, they proved to be worth 1/10 of that. So even though this strong IP company had the IP, had the cash, and had the, they also invested tremendously in new IP. They didn't exploit any of it properly, and it all ended up because they didn't. Over time, it all became worthless. Like I said, they sold it for 1/10 of what they expected. I like camera companies. I think there's a lot of interesting things that go on in camera companies. GoPro was hot shit at one point, but basically it's a company that has no reason to exist at all. Camera. Anyone here used it in the last year? No. Okay. And my favorite is Snapchat. So Snapchat, I don't know if you know, they're actually a camera company. That's what they say. I'll show you a couple of their stocks. So this is GoPro's stock. So they went from $11 billion to now $1.24 billion. It's going to zero. You can be certain it's going to go to zero. Not that I'm saying to short it. I don't give recommendations I'm not that guy. And Snap, this came out. So this is Snapchat. This is the cool, amazing app that was basically scared the hell out of Facebook. It really did, and they were stealing users from Instagram in particular. And then Instagram goes, I think we'll take that feature. And then they stopped taking users from Snapchat. And now Snapchat also, I don't see how they they don't deserve to exist because their governance structure alone, as far as I'm concerned. But their technology, they were hot, and literally 3 months later, it didn't work anymore. It didn't matter because that treadmill, that creative destruction within technology is so fast, so rapid, and they got killed. So I'd also argue that brand loyalty is a white elephant. First of all, does anyone here have a difference of opinion on brand, that maybe the brand actually is really important? Probably don't want to admit it.
I'll say in certain things.
In certain things. No. Certain things, he's right. But actually, the only things is the highest end luxury stuff is the only thing that brand matters in. The highest end luxury. Because humans will always, no matter what, be interested in status, how they can communicate status to the people around them. And it's not something we should be proud of as humans, but it's a fact. And so things that communicate status are going to be around forever. But I think the brands beyond that, they don't matter anymore. And so first I started, and I had this theory, but I wanted to kind of prove it. So I did some research on it, a little Googling. And what I discovered is that brand loyalty is largely fiction. So the best companies in the world at brands are the consumer packaged goods. These guys, that's what they specialize in. They have great brand management schools in-house. They know what they're doing. They're very good. But what they say that there's a study where they measured a group of consumers over a 1-year period, and that they defined as very loyal. And very loyal was defined as who made 70% of all their purchases of that category of product within that brand. 70% was considered very loyal, okay? 1 year later, only 45% of those people were still in that same category. Now, how can people be very loyal when more than half of them are not very loyal, not loyal at all, in the following year? But this is the way, even the best in the world that really put enormous amounts of energy into building brands look at it and define loyalty in a way that any reasonable person would look at and go, well, that doesn't seem very loyal. That seems like you were just convenient at the time. And I would argue that's what it has a lot more to do with distribution and shelf space than anything else with most brands. So brands are, or especially really were, very useful though for one period of time. What brands do is brands help us form a heuristic in our mind, so when there's so many decisions to make and we have incomplete information, we can use the brand to help us make choices. So we can shortcut the decision making. So if you are going to buy a new category of product that you've never bought in before, the brand that you've heard of the most, that you're most familiar with, not that you even know about, but you have the greatest level of awareness about, you will be naturally drawn to. Because if there's a sense of familiarity, it seems like a less risky choice. So it's really good as a heuristic. And brands matter when you think about walking down the grocery aisle, when you have hundreds of thousands of SKUs, different products that are there, and you don't really know what the difference is between the 18 varieties of canned peas, but you want to make a reasonable decision, so you go with Green Giant because you know who Green Giant is, right? So it really may have mattered in decisions like that, but not so much anymore. And that's mostly because of now we have actually better shortcuts, better heuristics to make good decisions. And Yelp and Amazon are great examples of this. So there's another Harvard study in 2011 where they were trying to determine the effect of Yelp reviews on restaurants. And so they did this in the Seattle area. They did it in 2011, but they reviewed tax receipts from the restaurants in Seattle for the 10 years prior to that. So a period of time where Yelp didn't exist yet, and a part where Yelp did. And then they measured the reviews. And what they found was something that was I guess it validates my theory, which was that basically that it was really bad for chain restaurants. Yelp was bad for chain restaurants because why would anyone in their right mind go to Applebees? Really? Unless that sort of dodgy looking strip mall with that Chinese restaurant in it seems like the only other option, and that seems very risky, right? But if I can look on Yelp and see it's got 4 stars and I see pictures of all the food and I can read reviews, I'm not going to Applebees. No way. No way. So while restaurant sales overall are growing, chain restaurant sales are declining. Why is that? I mean, there's a other economic argument about like the shrinking middle class that Goldsmith made to me, which I think has some validity. But I also think that now that people can make reasonable decisions about places to eat that are not Applebee's or Fridays, I think that they're going to choose something else if they can. I know it certainly has changed the restaurants that I go to in a huge way. Usually I would go with something I knew and understood, because I'm not a risky eater like Goldsmith is. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Go with something I'm familiar with, or something that's recommended by somebody that I know. That was always my approach before. And now, we try new things all the time. It's easy. And also, the food delivery services also change it too. Because I can have all these smaller restaurants I never had exposure to before, I can have them delivered to my house really easily. So, and it has the same effect on Amazon. What you find is, why is it important to go and buy the discovery, let me just say it this way, the discovery of new brands on Amazon is amazing. There are lots of small boutique brands that are flourishing now that may have existed for the last 20 years, but we would have no awareness of them because they weren't on the store shelves around us. And ultimately, because of the review system in Amazon, the product must perform. They don't have to be the best marketers. The product's got to be better. And I think that fundamentally that's all we want. We're only using branding and marketing as a substitute for basically real information about the experience we'd have with a particular product. So this review system is going to only expand. Is anyone here, or who here has read the books Demon and Freedom by Daniel Suarez? All right, they're sci-fi books, really great though. So, and I think it was maybe seven years ago or so, I think a lot of us read that book, or those books. They're very entertaining, but one of the interesting things at the time was it actually, I know we have Cyberman people here, but it made me think totally differently about privacy for the first time. I was definitely only privacy, 100% confidential, didn't want anyone to know anything about me. But I thought that the only other alternative that might be as good as that is if everyone knew everything. Everyone knew everything. Because if everyone knew everything, the overall benefit to society and to me and my personal decision making would be heightened, and having to let everyone know everything about me would be worth it. And here's what I mean. In this book, basically people wear normal glasses, right? But there's augmented reality, which didn't exist then, really in any kind of commercial form, but it does now. If you have a new iPhone, you have it. Where when you see anybody, it'll have a star rating above them. You can see the reviews. After the encounter, you can rate them. It will be this way. I'm telling you, I guarantee this is coming. Who here uses Uber? You have a rating. Your driver has a rating, but so do you. Ask your driver what it is. You have a rating. If you don't treat your driver well, you'll be slower to getting picked up. You know why? Because they have reviews of you. And they'll go get someone else with a better review first. But everything is going to be this way. Everything is going to be this way. People will be able to see people. You'll be able to review people. People will be able to read your reviews in real time based upon facial recognition. Like it or not, privacy fan or not, that's what's going to happen. And brand and marketing and other kinds of trickery are not going to be very effective. And I think overall, people are going to have to be nice to each other, which is going to be awesome. Be a little more polite in line. It'll be better. Because believe me, I am always nice to the Uber driver. Always. Always. Actually, I was rude to one once, and a couple minutes later, I'm like, I apologize. I got in, I was waiting here for a long time, I was a little irritated, I shouldn't have done that. Now, honestly, would I do that because it was the right thing to do, or because I wanted a good review? I'm not sure. I don't know. But overall, I think it was better for everybody. So, one of the other things is commoditize know-how. This is really big, and I think a lot of times we get the wrong idea about what is actually commoditized know-how. We think some of the things that we do in our business are really, really important, and so we take on the burden of doing them, but it creates this tax on you and your organization that probably isn't necessary. So what do I mean by that? What are some examples of it, I guess? This is definitely a sacred cow for some people in my world. Zappos, really wonderful customer service is considered a really great thing. Really great. It's the standard. Who here has bought something from Zappos in the last year? Okay, a couple of you. Who's bought something from Amazon in the last year? Who has better customer service, Amazon or Zappos? Zappos? Bullshit. Amazon, I never have to call customer service. That's the best customer service. I don't have to pick up the phone and go, yeah, these shoes are wrong shoes. I didn't order these shoes. Take them back. Amazon, everything that I know exactly what expectations I should have, and it happens on time all the time. And sometimes I miss something, and they come back and fix it. Like I missed that I didn't actually receive something I ordered, and I just forgot about it. And they realize that it never got delivered, and then they credit me and they apologize. Well, that's pretty cool. Zappos, you call and you get to have people that are way more interested in themselves, frankly, than you. You're indulging their self. It's not you. They're trying to help. So, and by the way, first time this year, they were talking about, there was a Bloomberg article where somebody suggested that it looked like they were going to shut down Zappos, that they thought that that's what Bezos was communicating, telegraphing in one of his annual reports, that basically he has a big idea about fail fast, it cuts, they bought diapers.com, they shut it down. So Zappos is an inferior product, a commoditized product that shouldn't exist. Customer service exists because you failed. That's the only reason there is customer service. Because otherwise you call when you don't understand something or something is broken. And if the company's really doing their job right, you understand and nothing broke. So if your customer service might be something that should be, instead of looking and beefing up your customer service team, you should look at your processes and say, how do we make it so our customers feel like they know what's going on and there's never any error, or the errors are reduced to such a point that we don't get calls anymore? Then you know you're being successful. So I'd say that's a service that should be commoditized first, and that's by outsourcing it if it makes sense at all, by making it as minimal as possible. Ultimately, it should go away. It should be like Amazon's. I mean, for at least the first 10 years of Amazon's existence, you couldn't find it. Fulfillment is another one, and I know I have some friends here who have fulfillment centers, so I just want to, and I think there's value in it, but I'll tell you, every time I have to order something that doesn't get delivered by Amazon, it's a real pain in the ass to go buy something. If I can buy it on Amazon, I will always buy it on Amazon first, always 100%. And everyone else's fulfillment is bad compared to Amazon's. Amazon has some woman in her personal car pull up on my house, in front of my house on Sunday morning to deliver packages to me. And I'm like, I don't know, who are you and how does that happen? But I mean, literally, they're not in a truck, they're not, like, it's a person in her personal car delivering a package to me on a Sunday morning. I mean, it's 2 days or less. And I think that whatever fulfillment you're doing is not going to be as good as theirs is. And I think that if you're trying to compete with a company that's investing literally billions upon billions of dollars in fulfillment, what are you doing? Like, if that's not your area differentiator, it can't be. You'll lose. You've already lost. And I think that one of the things about branding, by the way, is that, again, the success of brands is much more about the convenience to the consumer than it is about those brands. And I think that if you feel like that your brand has value that it doesn't, then you might fight that serving the convenience of the consumer. And I think it's a huge mistake. Accounting services and HR. There's definitely like tax planning and stuff like that. I get it. That's a more complex service. You don't want to outsource that to the lowest common denominator. But really, basic bookkeeping and accounting. If you have an accounting department in-house, does it need to be in-house? I don't know. I mean, it might make sense for you, your special business. It might make sense, but these things are very taxing to run. They do take energy from the organization, and they aren't necessarily that useful. And one other thing I want to say about these services that aren't super instrumental to your business and how they become a big tax on it. At Stansberry, we had a huge customer service presence, and it was really important for us to have college-educated people available to our customers at any time. And also, there was confusion about stuff among customers, and we did try and improve all that. But we had this huge group of customer service people, and as the business grew, we had to increase it. And it was really destabilizing to the business, because on one side, you had highly sophisticated finance professionals, really motivated executives, and then you had college grads that couldn't get a better job than working customer service, and they were a larger population set. That culture is really destabilizing. And so you got to think about, like, when you have non-core functions, it's more than just the cost. It's the energy of the executive, of you, the business leader, and making sure it's maintained well. And it's also something you're probably not going to be the best in the world at. So HR services, I mean, our company uses a third-party HR company that handles all the payroll and all that stuff. I mean, years ago, we used to always have to keep all that stuff in-house. It's all outsourced now. So just think about these things. They're commoditized know-how. They are not the reason you're successful as a business. So again, back to this basic idea. It's organizational capabilities and leveraging intangible resources. So which specific ones are worth spending time on? And I'll say reputation and not brand. Reputation and not brand. I mean, everyone here knows in their business life that that a good part of their success within the community they work in is that they have a reputation for doing what they say they're going to do, for delivering when they say they're going to do it, and performing at a high level, right? I mean, I would assume everybody agrees that your personal, as an entrepreneur, your reputation among the people that you associate with is huge, a huge key to your success, right? You guys agree with that? Well, that's the only thing that matters. Again, people will substitute real information, ratings, reviews, real reputation, for imagery and branding and marketing. And so it definitely makes sense in my mind to focus a lot on reputation. And our director of communications will be here later, and he's going to talk about some of the things that we did focusing on that. And I think it really has to affect everyone that you interact with. So of course, if you're a restaurant, then Yelp really matters. If you're selling on Amazon, Amazon reviews really matter, and you got to make it a priority. If you are hiring anybody and expecting to hire good people, you need to focus on Glassdoor and make sure you have good employee reviews. People, when they do an interview with you, they can rate how the process was for them. People who review how they like working for you and rate the CEO and more. So, I mean, at some points it's a little bit scary, but at the same time, if you make it a priority, if you're just like me and that Uber driver, by focusing on a good review, I did the right thing. I did the right thing for him and me by doing that. And I think that kind of environment where you have this level of transparency, it makes us focus on every interaction on our relationship, or on our reputation, is only a good thing. So focusing on reputation matters. Reviews is specifically one place you do it. Obviously, your reputation with vendors and partners. I mean, there are times where you need support from the people around you, the people that you work with. And if you have a reputation as a guy who always delivers, then people around you are happy to help in any way they can. They don't worry about it. I mean, I had something recently. So we for Royalty Exchange, we were doing this IPO to buy these royalties for a well-known artist. It's expensive though. It's $18.5 million. And so the IPO proceeds were supposed to be used to buy this. The IPO was 2 months delayed. So, but the option was going to expire. So I needed to come up with $18.5 million. So I started asking around some people, to make sure to see if people would help with it if I needed it. And everyone I asked was like, no problem. No problem. What do you just tell us what you need? And we didn't need it. I mean, I ended up just selling too much of my stuff and then using money from Royalty Exchange for it. So we had enough. But it was one of those places where I was like, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be really close. I mean, the timing is going to be interesting. Because I have a reputation with people that they have faith that any obligation I have, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to fulfill, a lot of people are happy to help. I can't imagine being in a situation where that wasn't the case, honestly. It scared the crap out of me. So, reputation also within the communities you participate in. And again, Anthony will talk about this a little bit later, but so we're a technology-ish company in Denver. We need to be seen in this community in a certain way in order to attract the talent that we want to have. So what does that mean? We had to start looking at ourselves from a young technologist perspective, and what's the kind of company they would want to work for, and what would they be doing, and how do we do more of that? So we started those things. I always thought didn't matter at all before. I mean, a decade ago, I would have thought this was totally silly. But I was interviewing this bright young lady for an account manager position, maybe maybe 14 or 15 months ago. She said, "Oh, there's just something about this business, like smoke and mirrors. Smoke and mirrors." I'm like, "What? Really?" And it just totally made me think. I'm like, well, to the outside world, to this person who I think is quite talented, that's the way we look. That means that we have some work to do. And so Anthony will talk about some of the things we did with that, but you got to look at the world from other people's perspective and figure out how you maintain the reputation you need and not worry about branding. It doesn't matter. Your company doesn't matter in that respect. As the same, everyone have an Uber-like rating. So how do you do it? Some of the things you can do. You have to, of course, the basics, act in good faith, and if you say you're going to do something, do it. That is, all of you folks who are in business, and just if you're alive and paying attention, you know how rare that actually is. It's incredibly rare, but it does make you stand out. Beyond that, though, you have to actually, with anything, begin with the end in mind. If actually people are making decisions about whether or not to do business with your company based upon some obvious source of information, I want to try and manage that source of information as best I can. If you take an Uber, most Uber drivers are going to get out of the car going to say, hey, I hope you give me a good review. Or the more aggressive ones will say, how about you rate me right now before I get out of the car, and I'll rate you. Anyone have that? Just me. Okay, a couple of us. Good. It wasn't just me. But I think making it a big priority is really important. And as I said, one of the biggest things, you got to figure out the way that, how are your customers going to view you? How can you make it so that you are presenting to them a version of yourself that will help be most informative to them? They'll give them the most clarity about who you are and what you actually do. Yeah, I'll give it to you guys if you want, yeah. Rachel can send it out to everybody. All right, know-how. So I would say that every business that I built has been on the back of this, that I had some know-how that other people didn't for a period of time. And that's the thing about know-how, is that eventually everyone knows. But if you're paying attention early on, you have a totally unfair advantage. So what are some examples of know-how? I know there are a lot of people marketing here, so if you're generating lots of orders through, that's new, relatively speaking, and it won't work at some point in the future. Not the way it does now. It doesn't work now the way it did a year ago. It won't work 6 months from now the way it works now, because there's more competition getting into the marketplace. There used to be all kinds of things. The internet has been just a wonderful thing if you're paying attention to it. But I tell every entrepreneur I speak with, if you weren't, so I've been in this stuff for a long time, but if in 2001 or so, if you weren't earning $1 million a year, you were stupid or not trying. I mean, it was actually that easy. It's so much harder now. It's so much harder. But there are these sort of arbitrage opportunities that really exist in these technologies that you can take advantage of, but you have to constantly be on the leading edge of them to know what they are, to experiment quickly enough in it, to get some basic competency in it, to take advantage of that arbitrage, that trade, that temporary mispricing of that opportunity. Eventually it closes, though, and that's the problem with know-how, why it feels like a treadmill. So in marketing, those are some examples. In bigger businesses, Toyota's production system made Toyota the largest car manufacturer in the world. Every manufacturer in the world copied it. Toyota is still, I think, technically the largest, but certainly their margins aren't what they used to be. So, the production system, that know-how, and actually it's split off into all these other, optimization strategies that different were built around it. Ultimately, that was a huge benefit to them early on, and still is. It still drives the business. Agile software development, if you do that, that's another thing. So so there's probably something you do in your business that is different than what other people do, but you probably feel that noose tightening, or you're worried about that noose tightening all the time, because you don't have anything that you can, unless you get regulators involved, you have that kind of power to keep people out of a market. For the most part, those things all get commoditized over time. It becomes something that's common knowledge, that becomes a best practice, and you can no longer succeed with that same tool set. So how do you actually win with this know-how? I think the first thing to recognize, and this is what I try and tell the young entrepreneurs I work with who have found something that's made them successful, is that what they won on is fleeting. Like, it really is temporary. It doesn't mean they can't continue to win, but the thing that they were winning on is going to go away. And And if you don't figure out a way to recreate that experience over and over again, then ultimately you're going to find yourself, and certainly the business will go out of business, but I mean, you could find yourself over leveraged in that business and really underwater yourself personally. So it's fleeting. Having a more humble approach is a good idea. If you're somebody who is really interested in learning new things, you're way better off. If you're just naturally curious about stuff and you just want to understand how stuff works, that's a good idea. Your odds of continuing in this know-how are much higher. But I also find that the best advantage to me is exposure to a wide variety of totally different ideas that are completely related, that then you can see connections, kind of cross-disciplinary, and create opportunities around it. So one example I had is I had this, I call it a domain name business. It really wasn't a domain name business. It was a trade, really, that lasted for, I don't know, a year and a half or so, where basically I knew how domain names worked, I knew how e-commerce worked, and I knew how marketing worked. And by combining those three things, I was the only person in the world doing one specific thing that made me on average $10,000 a day, that required no work on my part, and ultimately ended, though, and I knew it was going to end. It had an expiration date on it, basically, when a rule would change. When that rule changed, it was gone. Luckily, I thought the rule was only going to last for 9 months, but it lasted for almost a year and a half. But if I hadn't had e-commerce experience, hadn't had marketing experience, and wasn't curious enough about how something worked, just for no really related reason, I was just curious how this domain thing worked, then so I totally stumbled into it, and it was a really great, it was because of that I was on this like crazy sabbatical for all that time. That's how I met Simon. I was living in Buenos Aires. I bored. I'm like, I don't know, what do you want to do? You want to do something? And we did a lot of interesting things. So but the cross-disciplinary connections is really important. Oops, I guess I missed one. So one of the things that there's an interviewing discipline called top grading, and one of the competencies that they encourage you to look for in certain roles is something called leading edge. And leading edge is like, it's basically where you have a tendency to, you can't really leave good enough alone, I guess is the right way to think of it. So like, you always want to know if there's a better way to do something, and you're in constant search for the better way of doing that particular thing. So when new technologies or new methodologies or new best practices emerge, like you're aware of them early on. And I think that if you're, a lot of the guys that are, have marketing-related businesses, when we hear about people that are having success with certain ad campaigns, doing things in a certain way. And a lot of people have learned to be very good, to pay very close attention when they start to see someone get a particular kind of success in a particular way, because it usually means that there's this new trade that opened, this new arbitrage opportunity, and no one knows how long they'll last, but it can totally change the financial state of your business in a big way. Okay. So people are the next intangible resource that I think is the most important thing, and people talk about this all the time. Okay, your people are the most important resource you have, all that. I think for the most part, that's bullshit. Most employees I've had in my life, and I have a couple of here that are who I like, thankfully, most employees I've had have basically been more of a problem than a solution. Okay? Now, a lot of that's my fault. I hired wrong. I've made lots of hiring mistakes, but has anyone had employees here that are more of a problem than a solution? Okay. So I'm not the only one who makes this mistake. That's good to know. But I think there's a certain class of people that actually do make a difference. And I think that the only way that you can maintain any competitive advantage over the long term actually is if you are recruiting incredibly talented people into your business. If you aren't good at doing that, because somebody's got to run on that fucking treadmill. Somebody has to do it. Someone must do it. That is the only way it continues. I was looking to see if I could find products that were made in 1945 and still sold today, in their original form. In the original form. Now, you could argue that some alcohol is, but there's been a lot of changes around that too. I looked really hard to find this to prove my point. Coca-Cola is totally different, which is the first thing I thought of. There's literally no product that I could find that is identical to what it was in 1945. But Coke is still around. And it's not because they're brand, by the way. It's because they fight like hell with Pepsi for shelf space and painting walls of little little convenience stores in Latin America, so that the Pepsi doesn't get that spot. I mean, it's like they fight tooth and nail for the ground game of that business, and that's how they've been able to be successful. It's not just because everybody loves Coke. Coke sales would have shrank if they weren't buying water companies, okay? So anyway, people are the key to that. But I think we always think of A players, and I think I have used the term A players, and I think that is the definition of a very good employee. But that's insufficient to what you really want. It's insufficient. A players are very important. What I think what is really required is somebody that's more of a catalyst. I mean, every entrepreneur in this room, I guarantee at some point has thought, if I just had a guy who I could actually ask to do this and is resourceful enough to follow it to its end in the way I would do it, right? Has any entrepreneur here had that feeling before? I do, all the time. Most of you would probably, in some way, shape, or form, consider yourself or have considered yourself a catalyst. I mean, especially the specific definition of a catalyst. A catalyst is something in very tiny quantities has the ability to have a repeated effect on the chemical environment around it, and it requires far less energy for that catalyst to cause that chemical reaction than would otherwise be required. That's what a catalyst is. Like, that's what the business really needs. But how do you get somebody like that in your business? First of all, there are very few of these people out there, and most of them, they're not going to be motivated to be an employee. I would say most of the best catalysts I know would consider themselves otherwise unemployable. I consider myself unemployable. I have been employed, though. So, I think the thing is you have to have a serious rethinking around investment capital on people, at least around these people. Think about it totally differently. And I think that my tendency is just like everyone else's. When I think about an employee, I go, well, let's see, when I was 25 years old, I was making, $37,000 a year. And so if I pay this guy 50, like, that should be good. He should be happy with that. Or I'm thinking about, like, what's the competitive wage for this person or, for this role? And I think about them as roles, like people to do a job, people to do, to spend their time to do a specific labor. But what you need people to do is you need people to engage in creating more, you want people to be an intangible resource for you where they can create things that you can't actually formulate for them. And any employee that you can, that requires you to actually dictate specifically step A, step B, step C, actually that should be software, not a human being. You should write some software code for it. Hire some Indian to write some software code to do that job. You don't need a human being to do it. But you do need human beings who can do things, who can solve problems, can be resourceful enough to get stuff done that don't require specific enough direction from you to do it, because you might not know how to do it, but if you focused on it enough, you could figure it out. So I think we need to think about the way that you normally think about capital investments in intangibles, factories and plants and all that stuff that we thought would give us some big advantage for. Those huge capital expenses that businesses were making that they no longer make anymore at all in buildings and facilities and all that. Should that be channeled in some way to investing in people? Not all people, not most people. They certainly aren't worthy of it. But some people, if you thought about how much the right person in the right position, motivated enough to work the way you would have worked, the impact they could have on your business, what that would be worth to you. I mean, it's very difficult for me to actually articulate how valuable a great catalyst in royalty exchange would be to me today. I mean, it's hard to put an upper end limit on it, honestly. So how do you invest in this? So first of all, you have to think differently about the money around it. Secondly, you have to invest in the recruiting skills and the sort of the practice around recruiting. One of the best decisions that we made in our business last year, it was a little bit of a personal sacrifice for me, is that Rachel, who, I still call my personal assistant, but in truth she's not, started about this time last year learning to be our full-time recruiter at Royalty Exchange. So she does everything, the entire process from beginning to end. There was a lot of learning that had to happen, a lot of processes, procedures that had to be put in place, but our process for dealing with highly qualified candidates that come through our funnel is incredibly professional. It's done in the same way every time. Just like you guys would marketers, you would optimize a marketing funnel. You have to optimize a recruiting funnel too. I mean, the prospects you want to be in a seat working for your business, they have to have a certain kind of experience. But I will say that process, best case, it gets you A players. It doesn't get you catalysts. They need something else. But you got to invest in that process. I talk about top grading as a system you could use. There are other systems out there, but you have to have a way of doing it. Onboarding, training, development, investing in that, like that's way more important, I think, to invest in that than to invest in your accounting department or in HR services. You don't really want HR services, that's legal stuff. You really want somebody who can bring people into your organization and get them enough orientation about what's actually happening in the business fast enough that they can actually be a real contributor to the team, which it's very rare that people can come in and move the needle in any big way in less than 3 months. I've seen it happen in a couple ways where people can do it, but usually people don't really hit their stride until after they're there for 6 months. If you don't have onboarding or training or anything like that, it's a lot longer. It probably will never happen. So who here considers themselves a catalyst? Come on, you guys, really? All right. A lot of us do. What would it take to get you to work for someone else? What would it take? Now imagine you want that guy, but you want to pay that guy what? You're kidding yourselves. Yeah, come on, you need to create a win-win situation, a situation that is so compelling to them. One of the things I loved about working for Porter, and Porter completely overpays most people work for him, totally overpays them. Some people he underpays. I'm just joking. Wasn't funny, I guess. I think that the thing is about Porter is he had this attitude. He said it's his obligation to make sure that there's a big enough opportunity for you in his company that you wouldn't dream of going somewhere else. And that means that's why everyone there's overpaid. I mean, there's definitely, for almost everyone in that business, and Sean can vouch for this, there's not a better opportunity for them than working in that business because of what they're paid. All right, so regulatory capture. Who here doesn't like the government? All right, I don't like them either. I don't like them either, but this is an intangible, and it's something that you just have to think about. Amazon got $1.2 billion from governments since 2015. That doesn't account the decade that they didn't pay sales tax, that every one of their competitors had to pay. Right? Kind of unfair for other I don't know, e-commerce companies or even other Walmart. I mean, Walmart got $1.2 billion in its history. Its history. U.S. corporate tax rate is 35%. It might change, who knows? But in fact, what did people pay? Nike paid 14%, was their average over the last 5 quarters. Their effective tax rate was 14%. So if you're paying 35% and you're competing with Nike, they have a little bit of advantage. They can pay more for talent. They can invest. They can have higher costs of goods. They can have a higher quality product. They can beat you badly. Microsoft pays 12%, and my favorite is GE, who paid a negative 1% on average over the last 5 quarters. They got a refund. That's weird. Hard to compete with them, isn't it? And also, a lot of their markets are protected. You can't even get into them very easily. That's interesting. If you have to compete with these guys, it's really hard to succeed. Something else we're going to talk about, Sean's going to talk about, is Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has this weird tax loophole. If you're a U.S. citizen, basically you get no tax. Okay. I won't ruin it. I'm trying to set you up. So we know some people who've done this, and it's amazing. I mean, I do. My effective tax rate is a little under 50%. 50%. A friend of mine, his is 4%. And that's just. I mean, it's really tough to compete with somebody who's got those kinds of margins to work with. I have to compete for the same talent pool that he competes with. You know, I mean, he does live in Puerto Rico, and he did have some damage to his condo recently, but, that can happen anyway. So one last advantage I want to talk about, and this is kind of a special one, of course, to us. Anyone know who this guy is? If you can read, you do. This is obviously the business we're in music and royalty exchange. But the only thing that I could find that was created in 1945 and hadn't changed at all was this song. It's called the Christmas Song, written by Mel Torme and his partner when he was 19 years old. They wrote it in 40 minutes. Mel Torme died in 1999. Between its writing, it was first Nat King Cole was the first person who recorded it. Everyone's recorded it. I mean, Justin Bieber's done it. I mean, everybody has done it since then. I think there's about 200 different well-known artists that have released this song. Every time they do it, every time it's played, Mel Torme's, now his estate gets paid. Every time. And it isn't just in music where this happens, but when you can create, in my mind, the only intellectual property that really has any sustaining value is something that's a lot more akin to art, frankly, than is certainly patents or anything else. It can last for a long time. I mean, the Iliad is still the Iliad. Of course, Homer's not earning royalties on it, but I mean, it is still the Iliad. It's survived. It was a spoken poem, and now it's translated from ancient Greek, and you can read it in every language in the world, and it's taught at least it used to be taught here, and I don't know if it's taught anymore. I don't know what they teach now. So great work stands the test of time, and I think that if you can figure out, and this is one of the things I know a lot of you are in kind of a little bit like Cyberman is, there's a guru business there, where there is this sort of weird intellectual property that's being created that is some of it because it's trying to be actionable information you can do something about today rather than be entertainment, although it is entertaining. It won't last forever in its current form, but I think that there's an unusual value in guru businesses that I probably didn't recognize a couple of years ago, and the staying power potentially they have. Like who was influenced in one way at one point in their career by Zig Ziglar, right? Man. Of course, it died with him. His son is just not interesting to me, but I mean, Zig, I still have tremendous respect for. So there is something to that. There is something to that power of competitive advantage that can come from that, but that's really a personal reputation in delivering something special. And I think beyond being someone like Mel Torme who can create art that gets copied over and over again, it survived technology changes. Originally it was record. It went from that to 8-track, to cassette, to CD, to streaming. Technology changes made no difference to it. The artist made no difference to it. He still gets paid. It made $19 million. He made $19 million off of this 40 minutes through 1999. His estate still earns now on it. He died in 1999. So this is the asset that we're focusing on in royalty exchange, because at the end of the day, I can't find anything else that has any staying power like this. So if you can find something like this in your business in some way, find some way to exploit this, combine this resource with capabilities, I think you can do something interesting.
Now, since a lot of people own